my sincere and distinct honor to present to you Dr. George Koop.
I'm really sorry you had to sit through that. Can you, I made up most of that stuff. and it's like a eulogy. It's sad, the truth. I really appreciate that over-the-top introduction, and I am honored to be here to help you celebrate 175 years, but also the centennial of the work program at Blackburn, which makes you, just by its nature, very distinct. This is my first time here. And by the way, you probably know this, but you don't just kind of find Carlinville. You have to be looking for it. But I know a little bit about work colleges. I've been to Berea. Some of you know Berea. I've had the pleasure of visiting Berea twice. And I stayed, both times I stayed at the Boone County Tavern. How many of you have been to Berea? How many of you stayed at the Boone County Tavern? How many of you were disappointed to find that the libation of your choice was not available? Boone County, where Berea is located, is a dry county. So the Boone County Tavern is a misnomer. But what is really important about my visit to Berea, in addition to learning about the work program intellectually, when I left late afternoon student focus group, we were doing a research project there. I drove around the back, parked my car, and went in to register for my hotel room, and the person at the registration desk was a student who was in my focus group that afternoon, which put a whole new slant on work. I'm going to talk a little bit about work and college a little bit later. You know more about it than I do, frankly. But I want to set this up with a couple of ideas that I think are centrally connected to what Blackburn is about and further underscore the value of work during college. The first is, now just stick with me here, the first is this kind of slippery social science phrase, something I call goal realization. Goal realization. Just don't fall asleep yet. This is the ability of a student to see how their academic work actually makes a difference in their real life, where they can begin to see how what they are studying has value, application, meaning to what they do outside the classroom, and perhaps even as they begin a glimpse of what their future might be. Now this idea, seeing the connections, sounds like it's pretty straightforward and pretty easy to do, but it is very difficult for traditional age, first and second year students, to do so. They come with what, in my business, developmental psychologists call, they arrive in college at a state of dualism. They are dualistic. By dualistic, I mean this overwhelming propensity to see the world in very stark black or white terms. Things are true or they're not true. There's a single best right answer to whatever the question is that's posed by a faculty member or others. They can't really manage complexity very well in the world. They want concrete illustrations, not abstract ideas, which is what I'm pounding you with from the podium here. They want the answer. And those of us who are in the classroom, you see this in the quizzical looks and questions you get from students when you ask them to come up with 2 or 3 or more explanations for some phenomenon, like the proximal causes of the Civil War, for example. There must be one answer, and I'm paying for you to tell me what it is. Another feature of this is the ability of a student to, in their own words, tell you why they're here at Blackburn. Too often, especially in the first and second year, students will come up with some other some other language, something they've heard, something that someone has told them. My parents said I ought to go to college, or I didn't have any other really good options. And that's not a very persuasive reason for sticking around. So just accept for a moment that this idea that a student can see some value in their own terms, some practical application for the things they are reading about and studying to their lives outside the classroom. Just imagine that that is a very important reason, feature, state of mind for students sticking around and finishing what they start here. Second thing I want to talk about is something we've come to call, the provost, Jeff, mentioned this in his introduction. You probably missed it because it was way too long. Something that we have come to label high-impact practices. High-impact practices. I'm going to occasionally kind of slip into the jargon and call them HIPs. They've been around a long time, but it's only really in the last few years that people like me who have nothing better to do, but other scholars, practitioners, policymakers even, have come to see their value. That is, when students participate in one of these, they are much more likely to benefit in desired ways. They're more satisfied with college, they're more likely to stay and graduate. They've been around a long time, but it's not only been since these last 5 years, as Jeff mentioned, I published this little monograph. You may not know the little monograph or the association, the AAC. That's really not important, but you know what these are from your own experience. Whether you've done them, you know of people who've done them. They include these, the HIPS list, if you will, includes things like doing research with a faculty member, having studied abroad, having had an internship. I'm distinguishing that now from work for the moment, but hang on, I'll make a connection here a little bit. Other field placements like student teaching perhaps, or a culminating, what we would call a culminating experience that kind of ties together the college experience. It might be a senior capstone seminar, it might be a project, thesis, whatever it might be. To justify the high impact label, this is because if a student has done just one of these things, better to have done it in the first or second year, but some of these are better placed later, of course, like study abroad and such. But having done just one of these, a student is, on average, much more likely to graduate. They're much more likely to exhibit the kinds of outcomes that we are after. A kicker on this is, it doesn't make any difference who you are. That is, these positive effects show up gender, socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, age, notwithstanding. Participating in these things has this kind of uniform set of positive effects no matter who you are. In fact, there's some evidence to suggest that if you come from a historically underrepresented background, low income, so-called racial minority in the institutional context, you might benefit even more. So it's the trifecta, really. Those of you who bet on resources. You got these three things going together. Students are more engaged, they're more likely to graduate, they're more likely to learn at high levels. Why? Why does participating in a learning community or a writing intensive course or study abroad, why such positive effects? In part because they have certain features in common. And now here's where you've got to start making connections, because I'm going to go through a list of 6 or 7 of these. And I want you to be thinking about the work program here and the extent to which the work program does or could match up with the characteristics, the features that make a HIP so powerful. Faculty and staff set performance expectations at appropriately high levels for the individual student. Students spend a significant amount of time and effort over an extended period of time in something that really matters to them and the campus. Students frequently interact with people they would just as soon avoid. They don't have any choice but to be in the company of peers who come from different backgrounds, may have different views, and so on and so forth. But these interactions are around substantive matters. They're just not made up. There's things we got to do together, right? So students are interacting in meaningful ways with people from these different backgrounds. Students get timely and hopefully constructive feedback in real time about the quality of their performance. We're not just left to our own devices, right? People are watching and they're telling us how well we are doing. Very important, students are required in some way to think about their thinking, which is an unnatural human act, actually. That is, we are going to have conversations about what you are thinking and the meaning that you are making of these experiences. And equally important, we're going to ask you how this thing, this whatever it is relating to what you're studying and vice versa. The application is real, right? It's a real world application. This isn't something made up in a lab or a studio. And finally, we are going to ask, you will be required to demonstrate how well you perform. The performance is public. These are effective educational practices that can show up in any classroom or lab or studio. But when they come together in a HIP, it's particularly powerful. There are other kinds of high-impact practices here on this campus and on other campuses. I mean, I think of the touring theatrical and musical ensembles that spend enormous amounts of time, right, practicing and getting feedback and then out performing publicly about how well they work. Intercollegiate athletics, I think, can be, not always, but can be one of the debate teams. One of the more common high-impact practices that we haven't a lot of data on yet, but I hear it all the time. I've had the good fortune to interact with a lot of different regional and national media, newspaper reporters and so forth and so on. And almost every instance when I talk with them, they tell me what the most singularly powerful, lasting experience they had when they were in college. You know what it is? When they were in college, what made the greatest impact for them? It was writing for the student newspaper. The Stanford Cardinal, the Harvard Crimson, whatever the paper was, right? I mean, why? Well, they probably spent more time. Actually, I did this, by the way, Luther. I don't know if I should have done this publicly. I was the Headless Norseman. 1966, wrote that column at Luther College, and what that meant was I was anonymous. And in those days, you could libel or slander anybody. But like the newspaper reporters I spoke with, well, let's just go back and put it in an objective place. You know, these are people who are spending more time preparing an article than perhaps for most of their other class assignments, right? Gathering information, writing the story. If you've done it, you get prompt, if not always affirming feedback about the quality of your writing. And then it becomes public. And there's another opportunity to get feedback about your competence. So all in all, that kind of package makes it, in my mind, a high impact experience. So we get this when we provide structured opportunities for students to spend significant amount of time on a substantive, important, meaningful task to the community as well as hopefully to themselves. And they begin to see firsthand the practical value of what they're learning. And these are the kinds of experiences that help students get to that state of goal realization. Some personally meaningful reason for my being here now, right? Now, it occurred to me, it takes me a while, but it occurred to me, you've known this for 100 years apparently, but it occurred to me that the second most common activity among college students today in this country is student employment. Of course, it's true here for all resident students and most others who come through this place, but it is also the case that most students at almost every college or university in the country works at some point in their studies. I mean, it's, the big difference, of course, is that work here is espoused, anyway, to be an integral part of the undergraduate experience. That's not so at SLU or Illinois Wesleyan or Southern Illinois, but what if it was? What if the features of high-impact practices were infused more intentionally and systematically into the work here and elsewhere? Actually, you can get, well, you're not going to do this, but you could go to the University of Iowa website, and if you typed in all caps GROW, G-R-O-W, guided reflection on work, you will see that the University of Iowa has adopted this throughout their Division of Student Affairs, and now have almost 2,000 students going through this systematic reflection and application exercise because they have regular, structured conversations with their work supervisors. And they've turned this into a pretty simple kind of what we would call, I don't know, focus group conversation. You know, 4 questions that they ask students periodically to talk about in the company of, you know, small groups of students. How is this job fitting in with your academics? Straightforward question. How is what you're learning here helping you in your classes? What are you learning in class that you can apply on the job? And finally, give me a couple of examples of the things you are learning here at work that you think you're going to use later in your chosen profession. Now, the first time students are presented with these questions, you get almost nothing back. Maybe some of you have had this experience. I have it always with my own kids who are old enough to. You get almost nothing back, in part because students have never been asked to think about their world, their work, their experience in this way. This is a learned pattern of conversation, one that becomes very, very important. Now, of course, some employment settings are more amenable to this. I mean, if you've got an art major with graphic design aspirations and they're working on the admissions marketing team, I mean, there might be a more or less direct connection. Others are more challenging to come by. But it is a non-trivial challenge to get students to begin to think and talk in this way. And you've got kind of a natural setting because you've got upper division people who are work managers who hopefully themselves have got to this point of reflection and application. The point of this is that these are the kinds of behaviors and conversations that we see directly related to students who survive and thrive in the college experience. But more, well, not more, but equally important, these are kind of the steps toward what we call in my business becoming a reflective practitioner. That is, being able to think about your own thinking in real time so that you can make adjustments on the fly in terms of the circumstances you find yourself. And of course, you've known that work here helps people for the world of work. People who come through here routinely will say they were better prepared than the people that they are working with to manage the complexities and challenges of the workplace. And it is even more so today than ever before, as we sit with employers about what they want to know about the recent college graduates that they are interviewing, they no longer are satisfied. They don't want to hear about the courses you've taken. I mean no offense to my faculty colleagues. We couldn't get students to the stage, the position we want them without having the academic structure and requirements in place. That's not my point. What my point is, employers are really no longer interested in the courses you've taken. They're not even terribly interested in what you majored in. And again, coming back to people up here who they want to know how what you have learned and what you can do as a result can make a difference for their organization. They want it in students' own language, not recorded on a transcript someplace. This capacity for a Blackburn graduate to explain to an employer how they can add value really is the key to success after college. That, and of course, having the skills and competencies to be a lifelong learner. So the issue for me, for you, my presence here, how can we be sure that the work program at Blackburn looks and has the impact of a high impact experience? Two quick implications, and then I'll sit down and we'll get on with this, right? Employment supervisors, the work managers. These are some of Blackburn's best, right? They have to be well prepared through what we would call staff development activities to first be sure they are well on their way toward this kind of personal reflection and integration and synthesis, so that they can then be in a position to help those who are working under their guidance, right? Second, our faculty colleagues need to be further encouraged and supported to design assignments that require students to apply what they are learning on the job to the material they're covering in class, and vice versa. We're learning more and more today as we look at the kinds of outcomes we're after, that it is about the assignments that faculty design that require students to show that they've mastered not just the material, but they can actually apply it in productive ways. We don't need every course at Blackburn to do this, but we need some every year as a student is moving through, so they get this practice and experience. Now, maybe everything I've said, you do here perfectly. No doubt you do it better for most of your students than most other places. But we can be better. We can always be better. I mean, it's the mark of a high-performing institution with this sense of positive restlessness. How do we get better at what we claim? So for how many students can Blackburn confidently declare that work here is not just a job, but it is in fact a high-impact experience? And what might you do to ensure that this is so? So I leave you with this challenge, that is to enhance the quality and impact of the work program so that Blackburn and its graduates can become even more distinctive in the future. Thank you for the privilege.